this rich virtual conversation with you all in this discussion that Metro Housing Boston has put together, where I serve as a board member on the history of the Section 8 program. Special thank you to Chris Norris, not only for your 17 years of service to Metro Housing Boston, but for putting this event together. Thank you also to in addition to Chris, to Carla, to Teresa, Abigail, the entire team at Metro Housing Boston, the planning committee for putting this together, and certainly our co-sponsors, Wayfinders, United Way of Massachusetts, TAFA, the Regional Housing Network, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of of Housing and Livable Communities, Mass Narrow, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. It is my pleasure to be in the space with each of you today alongside our esteemed panelists to explore the strategies to address housing solutions in the Commonwealth at this celebration and the sort of commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Section 8. We hope to foster some really meaningful conversations and dialogue that lead to some real solutions in the state as well. In a community, in our community's housing landscape, and how we can collectively address the challenges and the opportunities as we look to the future of the program, right? And what is ahead of us, what we face ahead. So you'll hear insights from housing experts and other stakeholders, each of whom bios are in the agenda that was shared with you. So we encourage you to dive in and learn more about their work, expertise, and backgrounds. It is crucial to ensure that everyone has a safe, a healthy, and affordable place to call home, and I might add, free from housing discrimination. And I see that as my honor and responsibility to ensure that work in my role at CHAPA as well. Metro Housing's mission, as it states, the duty to provide services that lead families and individuals to housing stability, economic security, and improved quality of life is of utmost importance. It's what brings us to this conversation today. It's what engages over close to 200 folks who are registered for this event to really be in conversation and community. So welcome you all into this space today. Massachusetts has been a leader. We'll learn much of that today. If you hadn't heard before, it's important to understand that rich history as we look forward to the future and what's at stake. So our first panel, we're going to start off with the history. We're going to kind of reckon with the past. I am excited to present to some, to introduce to others, Mary Ann Myerson. She is a retired director of the Bureau of Federal and State Rental Assistance for the Department of Housing and Community Development and fellow board member at Metro Housing Boston. I think it's important for us to take just a minute to acknowledge and to appreciate her work. As you'll hear from her in 1974, while working for the agency, in the public housing division, she was asked to work on this new program, and it had no staff and it needed to be implemented immediately. And it was called the Section 8 Housing Certificate Program. So it's important and it's really an honor to have you in this space. I will also, during this panel, hear from Dr. Christopher Herbert, who's the managing director of Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies and a lecturer in the Department of Urban Planning and Design. If you haven't been to one of his presentations or in his class, you certainly have read his data and have been using it. And that's the whole point, right? Using it in your work. I'm excited to have you here to help us explore that deep history as well. So I'll turn it over first to Mary Ann. Welcome. Please, we'd love to hear from you just in terms of your personal look at the history of Section 8 in Massachusetts. Thanks, Marianne.
Great. Thank you, Whitney, and hi to everybody. Brief history, the name. The Section 8 program, the name Section 8 comes from, it was created by Congress under the Section 8 of the United States Housing Act of 1937 as amended by the 1974 Housing and Community Development Act. So for those of you new or newer to the program, you might wonder, where'd the name come from? Well, that's where it came from. In that act, Congress designated public housing agencies, government entities, to be the eligible administrators of this program. And these agencies would have responsibility, but some, if they wanted, like the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, could subcontract administration to non-government entities. back in 1974, when HUD was soliciting applications, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, through, at the time, the Department of Community Affairs, which is today's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, yesterday's DHCD, and yesterday's EOCD. Anyway, DCA, where I was working at the time, did apply to run the program. And they were awarded, along with local housing authorities in Massachusetts and around the country, the first increments of Section 8 tenant-based funding. Contracts started coming in the end of 1975. To the best of my recollection, Massachusetts was the only, or one of the only state agencies to be awarded early increments of Section 8 funding. That has since changed over the years. And the purpose of HUD wanting to have some state agencies early on in the program administering the program is that they wanted to expand housing choice opportunities for people to live in communities that where local housing authorities would more than likely have a local preference, and if you didn't live in that community, wouldn't probably have an opportunity to be selected. So that was one reason. And then they also wanted to make sure that that state agencies like DCA could cover communities that didn't have a housing authority at all. DCA was an excellent candidate to be a state administrator of the Section 8 program, because interestingly, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had sort of a precursor to Section 8, the Chapter 707 Rental Assistance Program, which is today's MRVP program. We were already running that program. I think it probably started maybe in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was administered both by local housing authorities and nonprofits. So the infrastructure for DCA to run the program was already there. So that made us a really good candidate. And another reason we were selected, I'm pretty sure, is that the Housing Allowance Project out in Springfield, which is today's Wayfinders, and you'll hear from Keith later, the HAP program was one of 12 experimental housing allowance programs that Congress had authorized in 1970 to test out different ways of providing tenant-based rental assistance. For example, where housing authorities might sign a lease with an owner directly, or where a tenant may get a subsidy and pay an owner directly, and all sorts of other stuff. But HAP in Massachusetts, one of the 707 subcontractors, already had experience both administering programs on behalf of the Commonwealth, and plus they were one of the EHAP programs. My experience, quickly, how I got there. As Whitney said, I was working in the public housing division. At the time, I was really young and about to leave when I was asked if I would be interested in staying and working on this new program called Section 8. And so myself and only one other staff person, he was an accountant, were the initial staff running the program. It was ridiculous. The agency completely underestimated what was involved in getting, at this point, I think our first increment of funds was about 1,000 some odd units. It was ridiculous also because the state had made, DCA had made a determination to both directly administer the program in the 26 or 28 communities in the greater Boston area, as well as run the program under contract to nonprofits in the rest of the state. You don't have two people taking on that responsibility. It didn't take long for them to realize they needed to hire other staff. In fact, they brought over someone from HUD who understood HUD speak and what getting a federal program up and running was all about. And they hired a lot of staff, program rep staff, as state employees to be the folks who would work with tenants and landlords, take applications and stuff to get the program off the ground. Now, it took 15 years for the state, which was then not DCA, it was the Executive Office of Communities and Development, to realize that wasn't such a great idea to have state employees running the program directly out of the building, and that nonprofit administration of the program made a whole lot more sense. And that led to Metro Housing Boston and its former names too. Everybody has lots of former names. In any event, just as a quick aside, we did have some notable Section 8 program reps when we were administering the program directly. You might not know this, but Mayor Tom Menino was a program rep for about a year or 2 years. And those of you familiar with Waltham, Bill Stanley, who became mayor of Waltham, he was a program rep too. So the program was challenged from day one. Many of the challenges that existed then still exist today, but there were also a lot of successes. We've always had to worry, as we do now, about funding on an annual basis. This is a discretionary program. It's not an entitlement program. And every year, everybody holds their breath to see if we can sustain the subsidies we have and grow the program. Demand always exceeds availability. And always regulations, requirements are changing. And that is extremely difficult for staff to keep up with implementing these changes, understanding them, communicating them, and also working on a day-to-day basis with applicants, tenants, and landlords and other folks. I just always want us to keep in mind that it's the people who do this kind of work, who work one-on-one with staff, owners, landlords, lawyers, advocates. They're the ones that make this program work. So when we have these pressures and these changes, that can be very, very difficult for all of them. In terms of, oh, and the other thing I want to bring to your attention too from the earlier days of the program, let's keep in mind also, we didn't have computers back in those days. We were doing everything by paper and taking applications by hand. And for example, going out into communities to solicit applications, hundreds, thousands of applicants applying, writing all this stuff out by hand, doing calculations and keeping all the paperwork to determine who's eligible and writing letters and everything else, inspection papers. It just going back all these decades, along with all the other challenges of the program, we at least have technology to make things a little easier for everybody. But even with changed MIS systems, as we all know, that can be kind of difficult too. So the program really was not considered, a really fancy, exciting program, like building, big developments and stuff when it first was, when it got off the ground. But all of a sudden, with the advent in the 80s, when Reagan became president, when Reagan made significant cuts in welfare programs, housing programs, in tandem with a lot of other sort of socioeconomic problems that started to exist in the 80s, along with deinstitutionalization of folks coming out of facilities serving folks with mental illness or certain developmental disabilities, along with the AIDS program. All of a sudden in the 80s, all these things were happening. Housing need was going, it was just, it was huge problem, and homelessness started to rear its regrettable, ugly head, which to this day we're still dealing with. And that changed the perception of the Section 8 program that was sort of a portfolio of many other kinds of housing programs that could be helpful, to all of a sudden it became front and center of one way to deal with sort of the emerging crisis of people who became homeless, people who couldn't afford rent, people who had special needs. That, and I will say one more thing about that, when the program first started, there were very few Section 8 administrators who understood that many people that we serve have other needs besides just being able to pay their rent. In order to have a successful and stable tenancy, they need to have services provided too. And none of that really sort of sunk into a lot of agencies till starting in the mid 80s into the 90s. And for many agencies now, it's sort of second nature. But that led to the sort of growth and expansion of a lot of set-asides of different Section 8 subsidies to serve special populations like the Family Unification Program, the VASH program for veterans, the Mainstream program for non-elderly disabled folks. The list goes on, and there's many more programs we could talk about, but there's other stuff to talk about today too. So just to give, to conclude, this program started out back in 74, 50 years ago. It wasn't, as I said, it wasn't a very sexy program, but all of a sudden, everything changed when the needs of people in this country started changing dramatically. And it's today the largest federally assisted housing program in the country. Because it's recognized as an essential tool to deal with housing insecurity, to prevent homelessness, and to support folks' economic independence. So once again, it has many of the same challenges. We'll hear about some of that today. And today, I know, but it's also had many successes too. And there are many dedicated and passionate people who care about this program, care about its continued growth. And a lot of you are here today, and that's a good thing. So thank you.
And that's a very good thing. Thank you so much, Marianne. And I am excited to continue the conversation. Have lots of questions and notes I'm writing here as I introduce Chris up to present and share some slides on the data, take a deeper look as well on the Section 8 program and the history of public housing, the various acts in 1974. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Whitney. And Marianne, it's wonderful to follow you. You described yourself as a very young person. You must have been, because it's like you were still there. You have an incredible detailed knowledge, and it's also fresh. I hope there's some young historians watching who grab you and get you on a microphone, because there's so much great history there that we really need to capture. I'm also daunted by your knowledge of the details of the program, the evolution of the program. So I'm going to just say that I am not that kind of expert, but let me give you a broad overview of the history of the program. So, and now for something completely different, given that I'm an academic, I'm going to show some data and some slides. So let me start by talking about public housing. And so if you go back to, Marianne said that this program was created in 1974 with the Housing Community Development Act of that year. Up to that time, the primary and essentially the main way we provided assisted rental housing in the country was through public housing. So I'm showing you here over time, starting in 1960, when there were about 500,000 public housing units. And you can see that that was growing pretty substantially over time. So by the early 1970s, it was over 1 million units. So up until the 1960s, we started experimenting with public sector involvement in providing subsidized housing through various FHA programs. But the 1974 Act was really a watershed, because with that act, President Nixon and Congress said, we are going to turn to the private sector to provide this housing and not rely on the public sector. So the first thing that there was two parts of Section 8. People nowadays think of Section 8 as vouchers, but the most important part of the program initially was project-based Section 8. So these were private developments that were built by private folks and had attached to them these rent subsidies. And that program, you can see here, grew enormously quickly beginning in the 1970s. It was launched in 74, it took a little while to ramp up. But if you look, by the early 1990s, we had as much project-based Section 8 as we had public housing. Now you see both of those really plateau by the 90s, because what happened was we really had a philosophical shift that said, you know what, there's plenty of housing in this country. We don't really need to build it, because building new housing is expensive. Why don't we just emphasize supporting people to rent existing housing? So here's what happened with the voucher program. It took off in 1974 with that project-based program. It grew more slowly because we still had more of an emphasis on the project-based side of the equation. But by the early 90s, we had stopped adding project-based, and all we were adding was vouchers. The growth of the voucher program up through the early 2000s was really, really important to expanding the safety net of housing to try to make sure that folks had very low incomes and extremely low incomes could get that assistance that they needed. Mind you, you can see here by the early 2000s, the voucher program also really plateaus. We've had only minor incremental increases in the number of vouchers outstanding since then. Instead, what we've seen is the low-income housing tax credit, which was enacted in 1986 and ramped up slowly. And now it is the biggest assisted housing program in the country with well over 3 million units. And so we've now seen this turning back to supply side programs from the private sector to provide that assisted housing. But there's a big difference. The low-income housing tax credit program, as important as it is not a deep subsidy for renters. It writes rents down to 60% of area median income, what's affordable at that level. And if you're a person who has incomes less than that, the program doesn't provide you that rent support. So one of the, I don't know if it's a dirty little secret, but I think one of the things that we really ought to tip our hat to the voucher program too is it's really important in making the low-income housing tax credit work for low-income folks. So this chart shows you for among LIHTC units. So look at the dark purple bars. Those are showing you the income distribution of residents of low-income housing tax credit developments. So about half actually have incomes under 30% of area median income. And then you have about a quarter between 30 and 40 and 40 to 50. And it tails off from there. So it actually does help lower income households than you might otherwise expect. But look at the orange bars. That's showing you the share of renters in those income bands that benefit from rental assistance. Now that includes vouchers and other local sources, but it's primarily vouchers. You can see 70% of those folks making less than 30% of area median income also have a voucher. If you look across all these, almost half of residents of LIHTC units have the benefit of a voucher. And so the LIHTC program is important, but it don't work, particularly for low-income people, without the voucher program. All right, let me back up a little. So that's a kind of broad sweep of the where vouchers fit into the lay of the land with our assisted housing programs. Let's talk a little bit about who lives in voucher house. Oh, let me give you, I'm sorry, the milestones. This is the broad timeline. So we've already talked about 1974. That's when the Housing and Community Development Act was passed. Mary Ann referenced the Experimental Housing Allowance Program. That was started in 1971 by Congress to say, gee, are there more efficient ways of providing assistance? Can we give tenant subsidies as well as supply side subsidies? Let's do both and see what happens. They launched it in 1971. In 1974, Congress said, this is taking too long. We're going to enact this program. And the Experimental Housing Allowance Program wrapped up the studies in 1980. But by that time, Congress had long since decided, you know what? Providing assistance to existing tenants and housing in existing housing is really a good way to go. So it's launched in 1974. And this was referenced, but they were originally not called vouchers. They were certificates. And the distinction there was a certificate said, the government you pay 30% of your income up to the fair market rent, and the government pays the rest. If you found an apartment that rented for above the fair market rent, you were out of luck. You couldn't rent that apartment. So the what you were able to rent in the market was capped at that fair market rent. Then in 1983, Congress actually authorized this new voucher form of assistance that said tenants actually, if they wanted to, could opt to rent for apartments above the fair market rent, but they would be responsible for paying every dollar of rent above that 30% of income standard. So for a while then, we actually had two programs. We had the Housing Certificate Program and the Housing Voucher Program. Next milestone I want to point out is 1990, Congress passes the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. So this is a recognition now of how do we take this housing assistance program and not just to be a safety net for people to afford housing, but actually a launching pad for people to improve their lives. And the Family Self-Sufficiency Program said, okay, you're going to enter into this program today with your income is, and you're paying 30% of that income for rent. As your income goes up, you'll pay that incremental more towards your rent, but rather than going to the property, it's going to go into an escrow account, and we're going to hold that for you. And you set a goal. Do I want to go to school? Do I want to get job training? Do I want to buy a home? And so it creates a way in which this program is now becomes ability to build wealth. Still exists today. It could deserve more attention because it's a really fabulous program for people to have a real leg up. 1995, the Moving to Work demonstration program started, which allowed a small number of PHAs to be freed from the very restrictive rules and regulations governing how they spend all the funding they were getting for both public housing and for voucher programs, and also gave them leeway to set new ways of setting rents and determining incomes. And I think this is really a watershed program in realizing that if you give local housing authorities more freedom to operate the program towards their goals, and not have to be so rule bound, you can achieve a lot more. That program now is being expanded to 139 PHAs, given how it proved to be so effective. 1998, the Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act merged the certificate and voucher program. So from this point forward, all we have is the Housing Choice Voucher Program as we know it today. It set new targets, though, for saying how many of those voucher holders had to have incomes below certain levels and targeting the program more at lower income households. And importantly, it also allowed vouchers now to be used for home ownership. The regs for this were issued in 2000, and that also continues to be an important permutation of the Section 8 program that lately has been getting a lot more attention as well. In 2012, HUD started a pilot in 5 market areas to go from fair market rent set at the metropolitan area level to allowing them to be set at the zip code level. This is really important for thinking about the program as a mobility program, because if I have a voucher and I'm trying to move to higher cost area where there may be better schools, better access to jobs, but the rent levels there are much higher than they are in the central part of a metropolitan area, I'm going to be out of luck. But now, if you're saying we're going to set the rents based on those local rents, you may facilitate greater mobility. That pilot was fairly successful. It was expanded to 24 markets in 2016, and as of January 25, it's going to go to 65 markets. So that's really an important landmark in the program's evolution. And then last is the Community Choice Demonstration pilot, a demonstration that was begun with 8 PHAs just in 2021 to see whether or not greater supports for tenants as they seek to lease up, to get mobility counseling, to identify places of opportunity they could move to provide logistical support, and to provide financial support might help to increase the program's ability as a mobility program. There are other big landmarks, but those are some of the key ones. I just want to close on a couple of other facts. One is just who does the program serve? And here what I'm doing is I'm comparing the voucher program with public housing and project-based Section 8. And I think what really is startling and stark is just how much this program is really helping people of the greatest needs. On the left-hand side, if you look at the average income of participants in these programs, they're just about 20% of area median income. So this is an extremely low income population by and large. About a third are elderly, about a third have some disability, and about a third are single parents with kids. And so the program is really helping some of the most vulnerable folks to keep stably and affordably housed. One distinction you'll see here is that the Section 8 project-based program has a higher share of elderly, a lower share of folks with children, and also is slightly less serving a BIPOC community. And that reflects the fact that that program did have more suburban penetration, more suburban communities adopted it and limited it to elderly households. And so there's some distinction in that program, but otherwise these programs are all aimed at pretty low income, pretty needy populations. Let me close by a couple of slides to highlight two of both the biggest challenges in the program and ways in which I think a lot of innovation has been happening, and particularly here in Massachusetts. One is that the voucher program has the potential for opening up opportunities, as I've touched on, for people to move to areas of higher opportunity because they're not limited to where that housing is built. And often, we all know the history of public housing was highly concentrated in poor urban communities. And project-based Section 8 also had a tendency to be concentrated. Vouchers open up the whole market area. And so to what extent has the voucher program lived up to that potential for being a mobility program? So on this chart, on the left-hand side, I'm showing you the neighborhood characteristics by income of where all renters live on the far left side, then LIHTC, vouchers, project-based assistance, and public housing. The right-hand side of the chart is dealing with racial composition. Let's just focus on the left-hand side first. The green bars are showing you the percentage of those neighborhoods that are relatively low poverty, less than 10% or 10 to 19%, and the orange are high poverty. If you look at the right-hand side, you can see that public housing is heavily concentrated in areas of high poverty. About 65% of public housing units are in property tracts that have poverty rates of 20% or higher. That's very high poverty. 40% or higher is about a quarter. It's extremely concentrated poverty. If you look at project-based housing choice vouchers and LIHTC, though, they're not as extreme as public housing, but they're not that much better. And particularly vouchers don't stand out as being different from LIHTC or project-based assistance really at all in this domain. people are as likely to get access to low poverty, as likely to end up in high poverty as they are in those other programs. And so in its formulation, the voucher program has not necessarily lived up to this mobility potential. On the right-hand side of the chart, we're seeing a very similar story in terms of racial composition, with the neighborhood distribution of those in orange showing the ones where the BIPOC community is more than half of the population. Again, very similar between LIHTC housing choice and project-based. Much more concentration in communities of color about public housing. But vouchers are here, they're a little bit more integrated, but not much. So I think this question about how can we make the voucher program more of a program for mobility is a really important question for the program. The last thing I want to touch on is the success rate that people have when they get a voucher and renting up. This chart is showing you the distribution of PHAs. It's weighted by the size of the PHA. So if a PHA only has one voucher versus 1,000 vouchers, they're weighted differently. But the key point here is that, and this is looking at the success rate at 180 days. So you're given a voucher, you go out in the market and search, and we look to see at 180 days, did you manage to lease up? Overall, the median for all the several thousand public housing authorities in this study was 61%. It's kind of astounding. People wait for years to get a voucher. They're desperate to be able to get this assistance, and 4 out of 10 of them fail to be able to find an apartment. This is an enormous issue. Now, if you look at the distribution, you can see that there are some PHAs that are doing better, but there's also a pretty thick distribution to the left, where it's about half of voucher holders or less are being successful. Why is this? Well, one reason, obviously, we have to talk about is discrimination. Landlords have, not all, but some landlords will be prejudiced against voucher holders for a whole host of reasons having to do with income, with race, and they don't want to rent to voucher holders. And for this reason, there's been a push to have source of income discrimination, anti-discrimination laws, which say that as a landlord, you cannot use the source of income as a factor in your determination of whether to rent to a household or not. I think we had to tip our cap to Massachusetts. Massachusetts was actually the first state in the country to adopt such legislation, actually in 1971. So it goes back to the story Mary Ann was saying about some of the original state level programs that were happening, where the state said, wait a second, we got to make sure that these folks don't discriminate against. Since that time, other states and localities have passed these laws. They're now evident in 17 states and 120 jurisdictions, with a big push happening since 2018 alone. Since 2018, 9 states have joined that list. So we're seeing a big push towards source of income anti-discrimination laws to help enable voucher holders to not face that challenge in the market. Now, that said, it's not a panacea. And there's a whole host of other reasons why it's difficult to find a unit. And not all of these are ones where we should demonize the landlords, but in fact, look at them as business folks who are trying to make a living. And the issues about property inspections, how easy they are to get scheduled, what they find, how easy they are to remedy, the application process itself, the rent determination process, all of these things add complexities to the process. What studies have done and looked at landlord attitudes, landlords many times will say, I'm happy to rent to a voucher holder, but I want to get somebody in the door as soon as I can, because every day I don't have a tenant, I'm losing money. And the issue is not necessarily they don't like voucher holders, because part of the income is guaranteed. It's because of the fact that that process is time consuming. And to Mary Ann's point, thinking about the staffing of these PHAs, and who do they have on staff to do that? It's a big lift, and we don't necessarily fund, not necessarily, we don't fund PHAs to have adequate staff to really carry out the all-important function. Then there are other issues like landlords want security deposits. They want first month rent, and the voucher doesn't provide that. And so there's a whole bunch of mobility programs, and one I think we'll hear about today, Snowmass in Massachusetts, is really a great example of how do we create supports that can provide counseling to borrowers, help them to negotiate with landlords, help landlords negotiate the process, provide that financial support for security deposits and the like, to kind of grease the skids. And that's really, I think, where we're seeing more emphasis from housing authorities and from HUD, and one that's grossly needed if we're going to get a success rate above 61%, and if we're going to get people moving to more areas of opportunity. As Mary Ann said, this is a tremendously successful program, but it does need help to make sure that it lives up to its full potential. And so I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion today, because I do think that we all ought to be proud to be in Massachusetts, where I think folks are doing a lot of good work to realize the potential of the program. So I'll stop there, Whitney.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been a wealth of knowledge. I have lots of notes here. As you mentioned, Chris, I am a student of this. I look forward to having that coffee with Marianne to engage even further. There's lots of questions coming in from the chat. You mentioned like how do we reach our fullest potential in this and the ways in which the program has grown over time. And as we look forward to like what we can do, can you share anything else just about like how the program has grown and what it's going to take for us as we look forward? Question to both of you,
Let Marianne go first.
please.
Well, I think, Chris, I think the goals for the program are the same as they were when it was created. I think many of the programs, Chris, you referenced, show how attempting to achieve these goals, ideally to reach as many people as possible, well, that's a funding thing, but for tenants who are on the program to be successful in finding housing and having a successful tenancy, a stable tenancy, to grow their own wealth, like with the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. HUD over the past, I mean, it slays me to say this, 50 years, progress is slow, very slow, but the wheels turn slowly, but the programs eventually are created. Many of them have to be authorized by Congress. Some independent, local housing agencies can come up with their own programs too. But there are many different ways HUD has tried to help agencies achieve the goals of the program. Most interestingly, I think the Moving to Work program that started in the late 90s, I forget the date. And there's so many agencies now that do have more flexibility to try out different models of making the program be more efficient, more effective. But once again, a lot of the best practices that have come out of these programs don't immediately or quickly anyway get implemented so that everybody, I think there are over 2,000 agencies running this program, and we can have a discussion about whether that makes sense or not. But in any event, progress is slow, but the thinking is right, but it takes time. There's so many good advocates who understand where tweaks need to be made or big changes need to be made. So, I'd say that's what's happening in terms of
Absolutely. The change is incremental, right, Marianne? It's incremental. Chris, things to add there?
No, I think we kind of covered it. I mean, I just want to again stick a pin in the need to support the administrative functions of PHAs
Yeah.
because there's a lot of these good ideas, but they cost money and staff time, and so and they're just not given that adequate funding. So. But I think Marianne's absolutely right. We've seen a lot of these innovations, and the question is, can you disseminate them? And part of it is, do the places have the capacity to implement those innovations? But I tip my hat to HUD for they are always looking to ways we can improve the program. These various demonstrations have been really important.
Yeah.
This is so good. Lots of questions are coming in the chat. One for you, Chris, just really about does the concentration of high poverty for public housing reflect that public housing concentrates people in poverty into one building, while voucher programs are more scattered? Is that sort of your assessment there?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why public housing looks as it does on the neighborhood level is because oftentimes the scale of public housing can be the neighborhood level. But that's not true. As Marianne said, I think there are 3,000 public housing authorities across the country. The vast majority of them are small. But I think it really reflects, though, is just the fact that there was a conscious effort on the part of local governments to concentrate poor people and poor people of color in specific neighborhoods back when the program was being really ramped up in the 50s and 60s. And so there's a real legacy of the efforts, conscious and overt efforts to segregate folks that are evident in the public housing program.
So good. The questions keep coming. We're going to have time at the end to invite you both back to engage in a collective conversation. So thank you all so much for helping us paint the picture around the history. Lots of uplifting comments in the chat, just appreciating lots of the things you've elevated around resources and etc. So we'll invite you all back in just a moment. And it is my opportunity to rightly segue into the present conversation, where I will be inviting up our panelists, Keith Berry, President and CEO of Wayfinders, Arthur Payne, from Managing Director of Federal Admissions for Metro Housing, Marissa Schneider-McLean, Director of the Division of Rental Assistance at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. Welcome to you all. I am excited for this discussion to really talk about the successes, the challenges, the nuances, and the present state of the program. So I'm going to jump right in with the first question around what are some of the successes? We're going to start on a good note here. What are some of the successes that you've seen in the program? What are some of the things that we can look to that are going well? Marissa, did you want to start here?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Yeah, we've seen a lot of successes, I want to say, recently. And also, just to jump in, a lot of what Chris just presented really, really resonates. I'm sure it resonates with pretty much everyone on this call, on this webinar. So that was really, really helpful to see. What we have seen success in, we've had really strong leasing numbers. We have very high utilization of vouchers. We're a statewide agency, so we are everywhere. We have implemented, we're calling them exit vouchers for our emergency assistance shelters, and that has helped move many, many families out of shelter over the past year or so. Chris talked about Snowmass. Over 200 families have moved to higher opportunity areas or better units since the inception of that program, and just the MTW program in general. The flexibilities that we're able to implement. It's funny, I'm looking at my notes right now and mentioning HUD slowly but surely. I feel like I'm repeating a lot of what Mary and Chris said. But the flexibilities that have been piloted by MTW agencies, we are one of the original 39, but some of those flexibilities HUD has used those, used our pilots to expand those flexibilities to other PHAs, because we've seen successes. I mean, they recently, a couple of years ago, broadened uses for eligible uses for administrative fees. So we were able to provide security deposits. We were able to provide housing search assistance, funding for that. And now everyone, we don't just have to do that under our MTW authority, everyone gets to do that. So it makes for a better program, ideally, for everyone participating.
That's great. It's part of why I segued to you first, because I realized that as he highlighted moving to work program, the STOW program, and lots of the work that you guys are intimately involved in, I figured great segue to kind of have you elevate right after that presentation. Keith, love to hear from you about what some of the successes have been. I know with your experience with housing choice and really around economic mobility. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure, really happy to be here. As Marianne said, this is where Wayfinders, formerly HAP, formerly the Housing Allowance Project, got its start. So we're really thrilled to continue to be doing this work along with the other things that we do to complement creating housing stability and economic mobility for our clients and communities. You know, as I was listening to Chris and to Marianne talk about this, and Marissa as well, you know, on the ground here in Western Massachusetts, development patterns also are a big issue in terms of both an opportunity that we're trying to create now, creating more development, residential rental developments in more suburban communities, which is beginning to open up mobility opportunities. You know, as we look here in Western Massachusetts, where I sit in the city of Springfield, we have a number of gateway cities that are really clustered around Springfield. One really big, huge gateway city, if you put together Springfield and Chicopee and Holyoke together, which are all neighbors, that's where a large part of our population resides. a lot of low poverty, high poverty census tracts in those areas, a lot of public housing in those areas, federally and state public housing. So there's high concentrations there. It doesn't mean that people aren't succeeding. It doesn't mean that it's not providing housing stability. But some of the opportunities around mobility are not always present in our region, especially as you look at how Western Massachusetts is known as a more rural part of the state. Once you get outside of those gateway cities, and some of the suburban communities exhibit like exurban communities in other parts of the country with large lots and so on. And as we begin to break down zoning opportunities and change zoning opportunities in those suburban communities, we're starting to create more mobility for people through all of the programs that were mentioned, including Section 8. We are also a housing developer, manager, and owner, so we see it from all sides. And that's been a terrific opportunity, but it's also incremental. It's really slow to build housing. But as Marissa was saying, I think things like the exit voucher, and I know we're going to talk more about that, the flexibility that HLC today has shown, EOHLC has shown, has really opened up things in our part of the state, has opened up landlords in new ways. There's source of income discrimination, but as people take a second look, they hear, oh, well, we can help you with not only an incentive to lease up or an incentive to address some other issues, or couple it with some other things we have in the state like home base. It's a totally different conversation today for us with landlords, and we're seeing them present themselves as new partners to us in creating housing stability.
I love that. We're seeing a theme today that change is incremental but needed, and recognizing where some of those shifts have happened. Arca, I'd love to have you kind of talk a little bit more as well, as thinking just about the sort of federal voucher program, what we've learned in Massachusetts, and the exiting vouching program, like all of that. It's interested in your perspective here as well, Arca.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in Section 8, there's mostly just regular Section 8 vouchers off of the waiting list, and there wasn't a lot of change in how that program worked outside of some of our MTW flexibilities. But one of the programs that had started back then was the 2018 mainstream voucher funding, which was one of those initiatives that had addressed, targeting vouchers towards the people most in need, who are for that it was non-elderly and disabled and homeless. But there wasn't a lot of opportunity to how to get those vouchers to the people who needed it. When we had the EHV program a couple of years ago, that was a second go, I think, at trying to, get vouchers to people who are experiencing homelessness. This is in the middle of COVID, and there were a lot of people who were struggling to pay their rent, and we were able to partner with a lot of agencies, around the state that were working with these families and getting them the vouchers they needed. But it was also a huge expansion in a program where, as was mentioned a couple of times, it does require a lot of oversight, and it required, for the most part, a lot of the regular Section 8 bureaucracy. So we had to work within those parameters. And another, issue that we saw at that time was that, a lot of these families that were, moving out of shelters with home-based assistance and just trying to get long-term stable vouchers ended up in units that didn't meet the best inspection standards or may not have met our rent reasonableness standards. So I think when UHLC introduced these exit vouchers last year, we were able to learn from a lot of these recent initiatives and have much better infrastructure in place, both in terms of the oversight of the program at each of the REAs, as well as with some of the flexibilities that we could use, where we more or less looked at what do we really need to ensure that vouchers can get in the hands of the people who need it, and they can get leased, as soon as possible. So I think we've been able to work a lot more efficiently and, use the vouchers that we have to house people that in a way that would ideally work best with the families, the shelters, and the landlords that are helping us in filling these units. But it's definitely something where we've hopefully learned from some of the challenges we faced in the past with these programs and found out a way to make this work specifically for, Massachusetts and for us greater Boston residents that need it.
That's it's a great point because it leads great into the next question, just around like what are some of the, instead of saying challenges, I'm going to reframe it here to talk about opportunity areas. What are some of those things that we have learned in terms of how we can grow incrementally the programs and the opportunities to really match the need and the resources together? Interested in your thoughts around what opportunities there are in this moment as well.
I'm
Keith, did you
happy to
want to start,
start us off. Yeah,
please?
I think as you already mentioned, uh, obviously this is the innovation in Section 8, and we've been using the word incremental as a negative here, but it's also been tremendously innovative, right, over its whole history in terms of what it's done, and in that regard, the key other party here are private landlords, right, and they have to be our partners, and I think what we've done through programs like the Snow Mass program is really, and what we're doing in some other ways that are kind of learning from Snow Mass, which looks to really facilitate strong relationships with landlords so that they feel comfortable leasing to people who are coming with vouchers, who are in high opportunity areas, is really thinking about how do we roll that out in the whole program, right? It's not just for that perspective. We need them in all types of neighborhoods, medium, low, high opportunity, regardless. Our key partners are landlords in this. And as mentioned before, yes, they are running a business. And so you do have to think about it from a economic standpoint for them, from an efficiency standpoint for them. And what we have been able to do and learn from over time is being able to kind of engage with them. And it's still a work in progress for us. We're not nearly as good as we would like to be in terms of understanding their needs as a key provider of housing in this case. And so as we look at that, some of the engagement things that we do to help ensure stability for tenants through an opportunity for tenants, for example, through the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, there's an expectation around how much we engage families during that program to support them in their economic mobility goals. So these are people who are thinking about growing their economic potential for their households and for their families in a number of different ways. As mentioned before, could become homeowners, could start small businesses, could pursue educational opportunities. And so we view these programs as needing high touch, right? So we actually try to engage people more than is in what our contract says, because we've seen through our experience that the higher the touch, we can address barriers that people might be bumping into.
Yeah.
And waiting a couple of months is too long. Then we need to be much more engaged so that we can help smooth out those rough spots to help people get to those economic mobility goals. And I think those little changes in practice result in big impact in terms of people's outcomes.
You're right. Incremental change is change nonetheless. I like it. How do we do that better? How do we, and particularly, I have a particular interest with the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. You talked about going a little bit beyond what you're required to do. How do we uplift that? How do we do that better? How do we elevate those stories of success? How do we make sure people have the right information around it? What are the challenges? Is it resources? Thoughts?
I
Keith,
can
others? Please, Maritza,
jump in.
please.
Yeah, I mean, I think resources, that's a big concern right now. The funding is not quite as free flowing as it may have been in the past. So we're looking at that. But I think it really ties into what Arco was saying before also. Streamlining, like to learning from these other programs to make things easier. Make things easier on the participants, make things easier on the property owners. And, I always say, like, the property owners are our clients also. So like we have to work together, we have to make it easier, we have to make it a more palatable program. So I mean, in terms of the landlord outreach, like Keith was talking about, we've been trying to really beef that up. We are we recently hired, I think he's on this webinar, a landlord outreach coordinator. So right now that's been a little bit targeted toward the exit vouchers, but we're really looking forward to expanding it. And yeah, I mean, I feel like having all of that will make the mobility easier. But yeah, like just for like some of like the really basic clerical things just to make
Yeah.
this happen more easily is being really huge right now.
I truly appreciate that. Like, how do you incentivize property owners who want to do the right thing, who want to engage in this space? There's certainly this fair housing angle, right? As Chris talked about, like protected classes, based on individuals who have vouchers who are discriminated against, right? And certainly education and enforcement that happens in that space. But I love the idea of where there's incentivizing for property owners when there's legitimate concerns around how we can address process. Arca, other thoughts around challenges, not challenges, opportunities for growth in this space? Interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, to the point about mobility and opportunity, I think in part for the program participants, we've tried to look into a lot of different methods over the past couple of years to increase the mobility of people who are already on the voucher program. Part of it is that it's this continuum where it's going from homelessness or housing stability to, that self-sufficiency. And while we understand not everyone on the program is going to reach that point, to Chris's earlier slides, a lot of these people are just not going to be able to afford even median income housing on their own. But a lot of people are looking to get, a roof over their head and then start looking into bettering their job prospects, looking into moving to a better area. So we've worked a lot for programs like family self-sufficiency, trying to expand some of the outreach for that to get more people enrolled, particularly once people are coming out of these shelters and maybe have a couple months to start looking into what they can, what they can do going forward. And then other programs that would connect people to, job or career resources and other ways that they can kind of make the most of their housing while they have it. On the landlord side as well, I think we've tried to look into, what are the concerns of the property owners that we're working with? What are they actually looking for? I think some people have a misconception that we're, not trying to help out the landlords or trying to squeeze, trying to avoid paying, higher rents. But with stuff like the new payment standards and small area fair market rents, we're trying to limit anything that would keep us from, you know, putting our voucher participants in these property owners units. And it's really just working together on, what I think are mutual goals on those ends to make that work. The Section 8 voucher program has been a public-private partnership, and we really can't do this without the support of the property owners that work together with us to house these families, a lot of whom do go above and beyond themselves to ensure that families keep their stable housing. We've had property owners that come into Metro to help their tenants with termination hearings and appeals. So, I think we've definitely seen a lot of initiatives in the past couple of years to expand that opportunity. Um, it's, I think at this point, a matter of looking into which of those work, which of those didn't, and how we can, make something that works for our larger voucher population going forward.
Excellent point around the mutual goals there. We talked a little bit already around economic mobility, and I tend to feel like every community should be a community of opportunity, right? And so, interested in your thoughts around fair housing. Of course, I'm going to ask a question around fair housing and sort of the intentionality and transparency around the program. Chris mentioned the statistics around voucher holders getting leased up. What are some of the angles or things you're thinking
Yeah.
about as it pertains to that, Chris? Keith,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. So I appreciate your comment about opportunity. When I was thinking the same thing. You know, we've been using the word mobility here, and we've been using coupled with a couple of things. There's housing mobility, that means people moving, right? And then there's economic mobility, that means about people's own economic standing and improving that. You don't have to move anywhere to do that, though.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so I think what is in the name of the program today, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, is about choice, right? And giving people the opportunity for that choice, and making sure that if that choice is to stay in the community where they are, and be someone who is, got stable housing and contributing to the community every day, um, um, in whatever way that they do, that's a success, as much as it is the success of that. We look at the family who's, graduating from the family self-sufficiency program, has saved up a bunch of money in their escrow account and bought a house around the corner.
Yeah.
Right. As much as this as a success in the program, to provide housing to some of the lowest income, most challenging people, in terms of their own kind of, their physical situation, or in terms of they may have some impairments that make it difficult for them to have employment at certain levels, and or the elderly. This is another program that really serves that population well, and can provide long-term stable homes. So those are successes for our program, that I think and it has been tremendously successful in that regard. Imagine taking this out of the equation. We don't have this. Right, and we stopped doing the things that we did with public housing. The downside effects, yes, we've seen an unfortunate rise in homelessness, but it would be many folds worse. So, and the burdens would be fully on the states. So while we need to petition the federal government to be doing more and putting more here, so that we're not kind of working in this capped environment, um, there is still a lot to talk about in terms of success here, and it addresses some of the concerns about fair housing for all those folks who would see even more discrimination based upon all those other things that make them part of a protected class. So that's what I would say about that question that you asked.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and again, I'm gonna piggyback off of Arca and Keith. As a state agency, we have the opportunity, and I think we're doing a better job of working with our sister divisions here to look at the spectrum of housing. It's not just Section 8, there's homelessness, there's, these shelters, there's home base, and having the opportunity to work together on that spectrum kind of allows us to better define what success means in the program, because it's going to be different for different people, for different families. So I'm just thinking in terms of some of more of like the economic mobility stuff, and some of the things that we've done. We have implemented the small area FMRs recently in hopes of people being able to move to areas that were previously not affordable or available to them. Our FSS program is really strong. We had 110 households graduate last year. 91% of those had escrow coming
That's
to them. So that
fantastic.
was really exciting, having an expanded partnership with the Mass Hire Career Centers has been really helpful, and getting directly to the fair housing piece. Our fair housing initiative through our MTW authority funds education and enforcement efforts for families with vouchers who are experiencing discrimination, because that is really important. It is not currently funded by HUD, so there's a huge, this is still a rampant problem. Implicitly and explicitly. So to be able to provide that funding for that
Amazing.
that protected class is like so important. And I mean, obviously, Whitney,
Yes, I applaud, and I know you have an extensive background in fair housing, and I applaud the Moving to Work program sort of funding that FAM initiative. I'm so excited for the work that they're doing. We're getting lots of questions in the chat. I'm going to pose this last question before the final panel. Someone posed anonymously the question around, we know that there can be significant delays around voucher administration as it refers to like following up with emails and different things like that and getting through the process, what measures can we put in place to improve efficiency? I think we talked a little bit about resources and making sure staff are sort of are adequately have the resources they need to efficiently move through the program, but just wanted to hear folks' thoughts around that. What could we be doing better and how? What measures can we put in place?
I can speak a little bit to that.
Please, Sarka.
You know, as I mentioned, there's been some struggles with the uptake in voucher programs and you know, new voucher regulations as well, versus staffing and, you know, having to deal with the administrative overhead. I think one thing we've tried to do is, you know, start to look into ways to make the points of contact for the program a little more accessible and, you know, clear cut for participants and landlords. So, for example, in the past year, instead of having, you know, a central email for all of our voucher programs, we've tried to make it so that people can, you know, reach directly particular programs or send leasing packets. It's something we've had to learn since we moved to this digital age from a mostly well, really almost entirely paper program just a couple years ago, to figure out, you know, how can people use the technology that's available to, you know, cut down on some of those barriers. And so we've tried to look into that as well as other opportunities. Obviously, there's still some, you know, bumps along the way that we're trying to figure out, but it's definitely been something we've had to really look into, especially with in the past year. It's not just, you know, voucher holders and landlords, but now we're working with other providers, other partners, and making sure that, you know, they are able to know who to contact and how to get things done as efficiently as possible.
I appreciate that. I know it's difficult responding to things, and as technology is an opportunity, right? It also can pose its challenges. I don't know, Marissa, if you were looking to add anything there.
Oh, I was just going to say that we've actually been undertaking an assessment, an organizational assessment of the program, of our operation and our regional administering agency's operation. So in addition, you know, part of that is going to be some more of the streamlining, but really taking a hard look at, you know, how we are providing services, what some best practices are, and rolling that out so that we really can provide a better product. But I mean, it's hard. Staffing is hard. It's a really, you know, the line work is really hard work. It is. So
I
we do the
appreciate
best
that.
we
Like,
can and
yeah.
really, really try and like try to, you know, I think some of the things that we're putting in place, like the landlord outreach, also will hopefully just make for a whole better product.
Love that. I think it's important to sort of do that self-assessment and like say, how are we doing here, and how can we do these things better? And knowing that that's happening internally at different levels is so important. Um, Final question before I know I said that already, but just I wanted to uplift because I think I was hoping we'd talk a little bit around wait lists and are there challenges there, right? Just thinking about what are the opportunities as we look to different methods around centralized waiting lists. Anything to uplift there?
That's uplifting.
Yeah.
We're, I
Plus
mean, we're
one.
working on,
Okay.
we're behind the times. I
Yeah.
fully recognize that and own that. We are also in the early process. And again, I'm only speaking for, you know, EOHLC and the REAs. I can't speak for other public housing authorities. And I think Donna's coming up next and she works to maintain a centralized wait list. We are working on getting a, you know, modern online wait list going. There are a lot of pieces involved. We're going through a software
I like
conversion
it.
starting soon, so that will probably be part of it. But we also work with the housing navigator to you know, have units listed and ideally to have, you know, project-based applications in a more centralized location, either with them or separately, and just we have some work to do, but we're working on it.
I love that because there's work that you guys are doing. I wanted to be able to have this space to uplift that, right? How you're working in partnership with Housing Navigator and other systems to kind of think about how we streamline, how we do this better. So I appreciate that. I think it's important that people kind of know what's happening, right, in these different spaces. So I appreciate that question. I don't know, Keith, if you had anything you were
Yeah,
adding
no,
there.
I think what you should be hearing is that this is a continuous improvement effort,
That's
right?
right.
And so they're
That's
trying to
right.
move turn a pretty big ship. And
Yes.
as I think Arco was talking about, you make a change, we've got to retrain people, right?
Yes.
You make multiple changes in a year, that's multiple retrainings, and it's multiple adjustments, but they're all with the idea of making for a better program, most
Yes.
of them anyway. And some of the things Marissa's talking about, we're cautiously optimistic about, will make it easier for us to administer, especially some of the technology improvements and the software transition that we're talking about, which should allow staff more time to focus with voucher holders and other things, and not need to worry about sort of managing systems or delays that the
Yeah.
systems are causing that we're working with. So um, help is always on the way here, but there's some real
Yes.
things, some hopefully some shining opportunities coming forward.
Thank you so much. Yes, lots of shining future. So we just heard about the successes, the challenges, opportunities we face currently around economic mobility and housing supply and cost. And now we're going to look to our panel to talk about the future of Section 8. Welcome, Sarah Sadian, Senior Vice President. Sadian, sorry. Sarah Sadian, Senior Vice President, I want to make sure I say that right, of Public Policy and Field Organizing at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Donna Brown Rigo, Executive Director of Mass Narrow, and Rachel Heller, um, Chief Executive Officer from Citizens Housing and Planning Association, and certainly Calvin and Anton from Urban Planning and Community Development High School Program Manager of Mass Boston. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about the future. Welcome to each of you all. Thank you all again for joining us. I want to jump right in with the first question. What do we need to be thinking about as we look to the future program? I'd love to maybe start with you, Sarah. Give us the sort of federal perspective. I know you sort of have a wide scope here, but what are we looking to as we look to the future of the program?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what our next goal really needs to be is to make sure that we're expanding rental assistance so that it's universally available to everyone who needs it. Really, all of the challenges and improvements that have been made to the program were so fascinating to hear about. I loved all the presentations from the other speakers. But the biggest challenge is really that renters can't access this program and these resources when they need it. And instead, they're often waiting years on wait lists, and during that time they can fall into homelessness or be forced into institutionalization while they're waiting for assistance. So we have to look bigger about how do we build the political will that's needed to really invest in what has been proven to work at the scale that's needed there. I will say that there are some opportunities, I think, in Congress. We're very grateful to have the support of Chairwoman Maxine Waters on the House Financial Services Committee, who is a strong supporter of rental assistance and has actually introduced a bill, the Ending Homelessness Act, that would create a universal rental assistance program phased in over 8 years. But what's really key there is that the funding would be on the mandatory side of the budget. It wouldn't be something negotiated every year in Congress through the appropriations process. It would be available for every single person who needs assistance, just like other safety net programs. I think there are also some other sort of intriguing future iterations of what universal rental assistance could look like. We know that HUD is looking at a direct cash assistance version of the voucher, which would give resources directly to renters that they could use to pay for rent. And we at the National Low Income Housing Coalition and with our partners at Results, which is an international anti-poverty organization, are putting forward a proposal that could create a fully refundable renter's tax credit. It would look a lot like the voucher program, but we're hoping it could overcome some of the administrative barriers with vouchers so that resources are going directly into the hands of those households that they could pay for rent and other needs. And that used to be sort of an idea that was floated by first by the Turner Center at UC Berkeley and Stanford and others. We had legislation introduced actually when then Senator Kamala Harris was a senator. But what's made it really more plausible now is the innovations with the child tax credit, where those resources were able to go out on a monthly basis, which is a lot more feasible and workable for extremely low-income households. So we do see some important things on the horizon. I will say that a lot of what's possible depends on the political will in Congress and the incoming administration. And there are huge differences between what a Trump presidency could show for vouchers and for rental assistance and what a possible Harris presidency could look like. We have some evidence of what President Trump might pursue while in office by looking at his first term, where he proposed significant cuts to HUD's budget, including cuts that would have resulted in about 250,000 households losing access to their housing choice voucher, in addition to work requirements, time limits, and rent increases on the lowest income households. So not a great picture there. On the Harris side, I think there's more promise for increased funding for vouchers, or again, for the renter's tax credit idea, given her past support while she was a senator. So a lot to be, I guess we're all waiting for next month to figure out what the path forward is, but there are a lot of bold, innovative ideas about how to take the success of the housing choice voucher to the next level so that we're serving everybody who needs it.
Appreciate that, Sarah. Yeah, despite the path forward, we'll need to have political will, right? As you mentioned, as we move forward. I'm interested, Calvin, in your perspective here, like your academic view of the future. What should we be looking forward to as we think about the program?
Yeah, so kind of building off of what Sarah said and then the other panelists that have went before me, there's a few different kind of areas that I think, more so the academic experience is kind of informed. Or what are these areas that we can improve on this great program that's been here for 50 years? The first, it's addressing basically, we acknowledge that the Section 8 program has served the need specifically of those that have been most marginalized and those low income individuals and families across the US. However, it is going to be this program that is going to need to continue to be built upon and evolve with the time as it has over the past 5 decades. Specifically talking about when it comes to the bureaucracy of the Section 8 program, I think that's the biggest opportunity for growth or how it could be addressed. In academic literature, but also in my empirical knowledge, whether it be at Metro Housing Boston, in my role there, the bureaucracy of the HUD requirements that the Section 8 program has poses a significant kind of burden, not only on the property owner, but also the participant trying to seek a unit and then eventually lease it up. There's been innovative programs that have come out to address, the efficiency of meeting those requirements, such as, whether it be on the individual level where people, that are staff members are, communicating expectations in a timely manner and that set the stage for moving the process as fast as possible that they can within their limits, right? I mean, obviously there's certain parts of the process that we can't really negate or go around because it's a federally funded program. However, at the end of the day, minor changes and incremental changes, such as we've talked about before, that individuals can make and organizations can make more broadly, can really be impactful in terms of ensuring that people and participants, those specifically most in need, get the housing that they actually do need and deserve. Another kind of area that in the Metro Boston region, some folks have been working on, that addresses more so maybe not the bureaucracy issue, but more so eviction prevention and other things that impact participants' ability to actually go and lease up units. There's been some work around an eviction prevention kind of guidebook for property owners where, property owners can actually reference it to prevent or at least really go the extra mile to prevent an eviction from going through for a participant, because as we know, a participant, when and if they do move, that eviction does stay on their record, in terms of, if they are successfully and it's an at-fault eviction, right? So at the end of the day, that's another kind of innovative tool that we can kind of leverage in order to help folks really kind of get the housing and sustain their housing options and stability. And then other communities, I think Whitney and you and I had a conversation about other innovative programs when it came to also helping property owners kind of comply with the different requirements that Section 8 in particular when it comes to the housing quality standards, inspections, whatever it might be. Most of these, and it's probably, I mean, for the Boston metro area particularly, but also probably more Massachusetts more broadly, the housing stock is rather old. And so, with the Section 8 program, there is a certain lead requirement or, this inspection requirement that requires the house to be de-leaded if an individual is 6 years or younger that will be residing within the unit. And so Lynn, just north of Boston, has come up with this innovative program called the lead abatement program, which basically offers property owners cash in order to retrofit their units in order for them to go ahead and comply with regulations such as the one set forth by Section 8 in the program itself. And then there's there's other things, and past panelists have also touched upon this, is the kind of priority and really trying to focus in on the programs that, continue at least the path, or at least people's path to gaining equity. In terms of, obviously it's a rental assistance program for the most part, but there is also the portion that deals with home ownership, or at least some type of Section 8 to home ownership kind of continuum. Such as FSS, where people are able to go ahead and put money into an escrow account and then eventually get it to go purchase a home after. And then I'll finally close out with, there's I think one of the things, whether it be in bureaucracy, the bureaucracy issue of Section 8, or opportunity, or other areas of it, the program itself, I think the communication in terms of information, whether it be on the property owner side, other third party side, or the participant side, is really key, from all levels, whether it be, the organization that's actually administering the voucher, or, also it's a two-way street. The participants need to provide us the information so that we can best assist them, but also we need to provide them the information that they need in order to go be successful and actually go ahead and get housing that's stable and will provide them with a healthy situation. So thank you.
Thanks, Calvin. As you can see, a student of this work, of this topic. I appreciate that. And in our conversation, really talking about what the Lynn Housing Authority and Neighborhood Development organization, when they got that $9 million to do that lead abatement work, it's so important to address it on the front end, right, around the housing stock. So appreciate that and all each of your comments. Donna, I want to have you chime in. What are we looking forward to in the future of this program? I know you oversee sort of over 240 local housing authorities in Massachusetts to help as part of your members, and so interested in your perspective here.
Yes, good afternoon. What I'm going to talk about as a model for the future are shared waiting lists and data analysis from those waiting lists. As we all know, for families and individuals in need of affordable housing, navigating the housing assistance landscape is no easy feat. These individuals are confronted with a confusing array of websites, contradictory sources of information, and in some cases, even fraudulent services. Adding to this challenge is the complicated application process, exacerbated by long waiting lists, which place a burden not just on the families, but also on housing providers who manage them. Recognizing this issue early on, MassNarrow, in partnership with its member housing authorities across the state, took bold steps to address these challenges more than 20 years ago. In 2003, we launched the first centralized Section 8 waiting list, a groundbreaking initiative that has fundamentally changed the way affordable housing is accessed in Massachusetts. This innovation made it easier for families to find and apply for housing assistance, streamlining the process while reducing the administrative burden on housing authorities. Fast forward 21 years later to today, that system has undergone significant enhancements, most notably in 2018 when we transitioned to affordablehousing.com, formerly known as Go Section 8. Their sophisticated online platform not only supports a more efficient and equitable process for finding and applying for affordable housing, it also provides valuable information about neighborhoods, schools, services, helping families make informed decisions to move beyond areas of concentrated poverty. This Section 8 list is always open, and the platform notifies and provides applicants opportunities to apply to other programs like federal public housing, project-based developments, and mainstream. Of the 125 housing authorities in Massachusetts with ACCs, 102 currently operate under this centralized or shared waiting list system. The Massachusetts model has garnered national attention, with HUD's PIH Notice 2020-02 recognizing it as a best practice. And it's not just Massachusetts. In recent years, several other states have adopted and replicated this model. Several others are looking into it, recognizing its effectiveness in creating a more equitable, efficient, and user-friendly approach to applying for assistance. In 2021, Affordable Housing in Mass Narrow partnered with the Learning Collider. This is a social science research lab that promotes social impact through untapped data and technology platforms. These researchers recognize that for low-income households, navigating housing markets involves complex and overwhelming decisions that in turn impact children's educational outcomes and multi-generational economic mobility. They believe, as all of you housing providers, where we live is a strong determinant of how we live. They're engaging with affordable housing and studying the waiting list data and the technology with goals of improving lease-up and retention outcomes, analyzing priorities and preferences to eliminate constraints to mobility, and ensuring the most effective and equitable allocation of housing resources. This research could have meaningful impact on the future of the program by improving access to high opportunity neighborhoods and schools, which could foster multi-generational mobility and more equitable outcomes in education and wealth accumulation. You can learn more about Learning Collider at learningcollider.org. They're committed to sharing their research and findings. They regularly present to the White House and HUD on the national level. So looking to the future, the use of shared waiting lists and common applications will not only create efficiencies for housing authorities, but will also foster a fairer, more equitable system for those we serve. And collaborating with these research partners and utilizing the data, we're better positioned to understand housing needs, identify trends, maximize resources, and adapt to evolving challenges in real time. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I love when I can be so proud of what innovatively we've done in Massachusetts, right? Continuing to be a leader and an example in that way. I want to share with all of our participants many of the resources that folks are sharing here on this this webinar will be shared to all participants following. So not to worry about the websites and the ACTA and Homelessness Act. All of these pieces will be shared for all participants in the follow-up email. That being said, like you said, Donna, where we live and how we live is so important, right? It matters. And I know that is important to CHAPA. Rachel, interested to hear what your thoughts are, as I know your service areas the entire state and the whole entire Commonwealth. What are we looking forward to in the future of this program?
I think the future is bright. Listening to everybody on this panel today talk about the evolution of this program and to acknowledge how much has actually come from Massachusetts, including the program itself, that Section 8, really followed a Massachusetts rental assistance program. It really speaks highly of the commitment that our state has to rental assistance. And hearing Sarah talk about universal rental assistance is right in line with what Massachusetts is thinking about. So it was a couple of years ago that CHAPA, along with Metro Housing Boston and the Boston Foundation and the Regional Housing Network and Mass Narrow, we all worked with the Center of State Policy Analysis at Tufts University to look at how would we create a universal rental assistance program in Massachusetts. What would it cost? What would be the impact? And it really gave us that blueprint so that as it's our North Star now, as we're advocating every year for increases, we know where we are headed. I think back to where our state rental voucher programs were back in the early 2000s. And while they had once been a model, they were really being underfunded. So at the height of the Massachusetts rental voucher program, there were over 18,000 households being served. It was funded at over $120 million. By 2004, the program had dropped to about $24 million and was serving less than 5,000 households. And that's when we all do what we do best, led by Homes for Families. So many of our organizations work together and we worked on those incremental increases. And here we are today with MRVP now funded at over $231 million, and so many changes being made to make it better for all of the people who are participating, whether they're the voucher holders, the landlords, the administrators, and many of us are teaming together again now to do surveying of these different users to find out how do we continue to make this program better so it's meeting people's needs, and that as we increase housing production in Massachusetts, no one is getting left behind, that our vouchers will work in the higher rent markets, that we're able to create more deeply affordable housing, and we're able to create more supportive housing. There's a new tool that was created with the Affordable Homes Act, and that is the Supportive Housing Pool Fund, which will allow supportive housing developers to bring together the operating dollars, so the rental assistance with the service dollars, with the capital for building it. There are other examples of this around the country that are in cities or counties. We are the first state to actually go ahead and make this a statewide tool, and that's being really built out now. So I see so many wonderful things that are happening. Also, one more thing I want to touch upon is just the number of rental assistance programs we have. So MRVP is the big staple. It serves the most amount of people, regardless of ability, or everybody who is under 80% of the area median income is eligible. And we also have programs that make sure that special populations aren't being left behind. So the Alternative Housing Voucher Program for people with disabilities, the DMH Rental Assistance Program for clients of the Department of Mental Health. And I think that's a national model too, to make sure that we have these different kinds of programs that are available for people who have very specific needs that need to be met quickly. And if included in just the general pool for Section 8 or for MRVP, it might take a very long time to get these households the kind of help that they need. So I do see a bright future. I'm a very optimistic person. Working with all this crowd that's both in this meeting today and serving as panelists, I know that we are going to continue to make these programs even stronger.
Absolutely. We've done it before. We can do it again. And so I appreciate that rigor and energy, kind of like reminding us, and certainly for the great work that that CHAFA has done. I'm glad to be a small part of that. Another question for you all, just in terms of how Massachusetts can sort of continue to be a leader, and then this sort of question around what policies we can explore, to address these issues around equity and particularly redressing harms, right? Donna, you mentioned a little bit about the centralized waiting list and having a common application and how that sort of works to address equity concerns. Interested to hear from others. What are some of the things that we can be thinking about in terms of equity and redress? Sarah? You want to jump in?
Yeah, I can just jump in. I
Please.
love Rachel's comments earlier about making sure we're not leaving anybody behind.
No one behind, that's right.
And I think what a lot of people are going to learn from Massachusetts is how to do that. How do we, there's so much focus right now on housing supply, and there should be. That's a good thing, but Massachusetts can show us that it has to be both supply and rental assistance and supportive services all pulled together. And that's, I think, something that that we might be able to learn from your advocacy in the state about how to implement at the federal level. And I think the other opportunity, I think, for Massachusetts is learning how do we communicate to the public about the value of investing in everybody so they have an affordable place to live. And I think you guys have done a great job of really modeling that for other places around the country. And I know that certainly the partners that we work with look often to Massachusetts about how they can make improvements in their own state as well.
I appreciate that, Sarah, right? The value of investing in everyone, the shared value, right? Like we all benefit when we do this, right? When we think of it from an equity lens. Interested to hear from others
I'll
terms
jump
of
in
that?
if it's okay,
Please,
Whitney.
please,
First,
Teresa,
thanks
yeah.
for those kind words about Massachusetts, Sarah. I think in terms of racial equity, this really goes back to universal rental assistance and looking at who would be impacted. So in the study that we did, we found that if we made rental assistance available to every eligible household who needed it, that we would really be addressing racial equity because nearly half of the Black households in Massachusetts would be eligible for rental assistance. 56% of Latinx families would be eligible. So that is really important to think when we are going for racial equity, just to advance it, to make sure that, again, no one is left behind and everybody is benefiting from growth, that we are doing this very specific move in order to address racial equity. I think also the work that's been done around Section 8 to homeownership, Boston Housing Authority is doing so much great work in this area. So are others. This is a program that, was big, I think, before the foreclosure crisis, big, relatively, and then kind of got quiet after the foreclosure crisis and is now coming back. And when we see the home prices today and how hard it is for people to become homeowners and recognize the harm that's been done, particularly for Black households in this country, the racial disparities that exist in homeownership, having rental assistance available to everyone and then actually being able to use it for homeownership, combining it with all these down payment assistance programs that Massachusetts is creating and that have come really from some of the federal dollars we got through during the pandemic, it shows that we can narrow the racial homeownership gap with the goal of actually closing it. So again, the critical role I think that rental assistance plays in racial equity.
So good. I'm refraining from snapping my fingers here. So good, Rachel. I think it's important to think about how we pair the programs and sort of model these things around really getting at this idea of equity and those statistics you share around if we were able to have this universal sort of model and how it could address those impacts are really poignant. So appreciate that. Calvin, I know you and I have talked a little bit around this idea of equity. Interested in your perspective on this question around equity and redress, but also around other examples internationally. And then we talked about this in our examples around India. Like, what are other folks doing that we can be thinking about? Because as much as Massachusetts is always like we're saying, like we're a leader in this way, but there are things that we can learn and adopt and do first here in this country. Calvin, please.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Whitney. With specific, kind of reference to what you and I had talked about before, with the case of India, one of my close faculty advisors and colleagues here at UMass, um, she comes from India and she, came over to the States and she now is based here and she's a wonderful professor. However, during her time over in India, India at the time was piloting a program that basically it mimicked the Section 8 program to some extent, obviously not exactly the same because we're in different contexts, but the program itself was giving people not only, I mean, if they could go ahead and rent the units, but they would be gaining equity over time. And so if you think about it, it's kind of like a co-op because as you're paying into your co-op or you buy a co-op, you buy it for a reduced rate, you're paying into it over time, you sell it, and then you get some type of equity back at the end. And so that's really kind of what I could equate it to here in the States. I think the model it seems to have been somewhat successful over in India's context. However, I think that, one thing, obviously you don't want to replay the cycle because as we know generational kind of wealth gaps or inequities, they do kind of compound over time if they're not addressed, right? And obviously through that evolution of the Section 8 program, we've had different kind of steps that we've taken to go ahead and address certain populations needs over time. But for example, the India example was definitely one of those that I think maybe, the state of Massachusetts and the US could maybe move a little bit more towards, so that, individuals have the eventual, I mean, hopefully the eventual goal of graduating from the Section 8 program. And so that they become self-sufficient enough to do so, but you need to enable them and actually in order to do so. I think another thing, this is just kind of a little bit of an added thing, but one thing that has enabled, I think, households to kind of, build up at least more wealth or at least, save for other resources that they vitally need, is something that was done here in Massachusetts, the $5,000 earned income exclusion. In my role at Metro Housing Boston, I see the real impact that this plays on participants, given that their rent shares are substantially impacted by that $5,000 deduction that they receive if they are in fact working and have earned income wages. So, it makes a big impact, and things like that can really kind of amplify people and individuals and families moving more towards becoming self-sufficient, eventually, hopefully graduating from program. But
So good. I appreciate you sort of really uplifting that international perspective in India and that example, how they've done it here, how it can be modeled, and then certainly what some of those barriers are in the program around like helping folks really build wealth, build equity. Don, I wanted to give you a space to kind of uplift. I know you talked about this already in terms of the centralized waiting list and how it's really sort of intentionally modeled around that and the Common App to kind of build equity. I wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts around, and specifically redressing harms, and sort of what the goal was to really address in that and where we're headed a little bit more.
As far as, the shared waiting list, the idea, these applicants are applying to so many programs, so to me, trying to keep track of everywhere they've applied. So to put everything in one place, and we still have a little bit of work to do, but to try to put everything as a one-stop shop. Eventually, if there are home ownership opportunities, if there are other programs, services, just having one central portal to have for people to go to just receive whatever they need related to housing and economic mobility and opportunities. And so that's what we're striving at. And part of the research, that I mentioned that the Learning Collider is working on, looking at the voucher rents versus the private market rents, opening up, where are the schools and the neighborhoods and the things that maybe folks wouldn't normally think that they could go and live in, and what are some of the barriers? Are there priorities and preferences that may not be having the effect that the housing authorities that put them in place intended? So let's look at who gets selected and who successfully leases up and how long do they stay leased up and things like that. I think it's just really exciting research, and as much as we can add into these centralized portals, not just a housing application, but all kinds of information that folks can seek opportunities and build better lives from it. So it's exciting.
It is exciting. I appreciate you sort of addressing and naming sort of the unintended consequences sometimes that come by way of harm and how we address that and redress that and remedy. So a final question before I invite all the panelists back to kind of go through some of the questions we're finding here in the chat. Final thoughts on things in terms of the future of the program. What should we be looking forward to? What do we have the opportunity to do? What do you want folks to sort of leave from this and remember? Sarah, thoughts?
Oh, I was gonna say, I think one of the things I think the future holds is redesigning or thinking about programmatic changes to rental assistance that really empower tenants and give them the agency to make decisions about their own lives and about where they want to live. And, if we look at some of, at least from my perspective, some of the things that are some of the biggest challenges, landlord discrimination we hit on earlier, challenges accessing the communities that people want to live in, or making sure people have choices about which communities they want to live in. And landlords being these gatekeepers to whether or not people can afford their housing. And there's a lot of good ideas out there about what rental assistance could look like 50 years from now. And one of the things I'm most excited about is direct cash assistance to tenants and minimizing as much as possible the role that landlords play in sort of participating in the traditional housing choice voucher program, because I think many folks hit on earlier, it's discrimination against voucher holders is often used as a proxy for racial discrimination or discrimination against people with disabilities. They really hold an inordinate amount of power deciding the fate of renters. And we need to find ways, even within the program, to shift more power to renters to make those decisions for themselves.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. How do we empower the tenants, give them right to choice, address the barriers, And to your point, right, 50 years from now, what do we want folks to be saying? Calvin, interested in your thoughts. What does the future hold as we think about this? Any final thoughts or things to add?
Yeah, building off what Sarah said, I think the futures are exciting. I think that we have definitely some room for opportunity in terms of addressing what we've identified as not working as well as we maybe intended. And I think that as past panelists said, this is a work in progress. It's always going to be a work in progress. The work is going to have to be done incrementally, or maybe at different moments a little bit faster than we expected. However, the Section 8 program itself isn't going to, I mean, it has been and is going to continue to be a major player in the preservation, production of affordable housing. And the thing is that we should probably be focusing on innovative ways that we can make the program work as efficiently as possible, while at the same time maximizing the support for individuals that are benefiting from it, whether it be property owners that are, receiving housing assistance payments, or participants receiving rental assistance to provide a quality, healthy, and home that they can actually thrive in, not, just in an economic sense, but more so other benefits that come out of having a stable house, and home to live in and grow. So I think that the future's bright. Let's just end with that. That's what I would want to close with.
The future is bright and exciting, and it's important to ensure that folks, as you said, are able to thrive in the home that they live in. Donna, final thoughts?
And I agree with what everyone said. I think it also too comes down to, and Rachel touched on this, the effective advocacy that we do on the state and federal level. It comes down to, we need to keep growing these programs. So I know a lot of the folks on this Zoom call are doing it, but we've seen the effectiveness of groups getting together, and there's power in numbers, and we really need to advocate on both the state and federal levels. Depending on how the election turns out, it might get even tougher. So just keep that in mind. If you're called to action, you got to do it.
Yes, our call to action around understanding there's room for growth and in the importance of advocacy. Appreciate that. And Rachel, the final word here for the panel.
Ooh, the final word, kind of building off of what everybody said, especially Donna, your comments just now. Keep going. We have to keep advocating, work in coalition. That is how MRVP went from being a $24 million program to being over $200 million. It wouldn't have happened if we weren't all working together, staying lockstep, and explaining to the legislature and making the case for why this is so critical, and definitely for us to be doing that all together on the federal level. I think, along the lines of what Sarah's saying, really listening to people who are using the vouchers and understanding what are the improvements to make that will have the biggest impact for them, so that people have more choice in where they live and how they live and how they achieve their own goals. And then just, I think specifically a few things are around source of income discrimination. It was so great to hear Chris talk about the number of states that now have source of income discrimination. I'm excited about the new Office of Fair Housing in Massachusetts, because it's not a federal protection. We haven't been able to use our federal dollars to really test for this kind of discrimination. So having a state Office of Fair Housing will provide us with new tools to ensure that we are really reducing that and stopping it. I also think and this is something that was in our report, when you get to a universal rental assistance program, we will see discrimination reduce, because vouchers are just more a part of the ecosystem. I think we've seen that as MRVP and Section 8 have grown. They probably were trusted less when they were first started, and that trust increases, whether it's from landlords or developers or lenders. And then finally, we need to create more housing. You create more housing, you combine it with vouchers. That is the only way we are going to create more housing that is affordable for people with extremely low incomes. It's really expensive to build. It's really expensive to operate. We need to construct it, and we need to bring in those rental vouchers to make sure that rents are low for people.
Awesome space to end. In terms of that, in terms of this panel, I want to invite all of the panelists up to join in conversation together. And I have a few questions that are coming in from the chat. Thank you all for all of your attentiveness and lots of the questions coming in. And Rachel for kind of keeping us focused right on the future. And one of the questions that I wanted to pose, which good transition from Rachel's point. What are you excited about, right? As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Section 8 and as we look forward to the new state Office of Fair Housing and the Fair Housing Trust Fund. Anything there that folks want to add just around what's exciting right now in the moment as we look to that new opportunity and oversight?
I'd love to get us started.
Please.
So for those of us who have been at it for a while,
Yeah,
this is our moment,
this is our
right?
moment.
This is, when you look at where housing is on the national scene, where you have, and on at the state level, in terms of the level of investment, the level of focus. Yes, we are at a crisis. Let's use the crisis. And so whether it be with on the supply side or the demand side, bringing those things together, because why do it? Because we get better outcomes, not just in housing. We get better educational outcomes. We get better health outcomes. We get better economic outcomes, not only for the people who will get the resources directly, but for all of our communities, right? For everybody.
Yes, for everyone.
And so this is what we should be taking away from this. Both you can say, oh, wow, this is going to be a boring panel. We're going to talk about some federal program that's named Section 8, but this is really about better choice and an opportunity for everybody, right? And if we get there, we get better outcomes in all those areas. It's not just housing. It's about the way we live our lives. And if we want our communities to thrive, we have this mission for all of our organizations here, both the public sector and the nonprofits. But I think it's also about bringing together our private partners too, because it's valuable to them, right? I was on a panel last week with big employers, right? The biggest pharmaceutical employer in the state of Massachusetts, a national bank. What were we talking about? Housing and its importance to them and their employees, right? And their challenges that they're facing in terms of retaining and recruiting employees without meeting their housing needs. So it's a continuum of resources and supports, build more, work on the supply side, work on the demand side, because we get better outcomes.
Love that. Mutually beneficial. Interested in other folks' thoughts on that before I move on. I know, Marianne, I see you smiling as we pose this question, just in thinking about what it really means to have a office that's really dedicated to fair housing and the Fair Housing Trust Fund, and just what the moment is sort of calling for. Marianne, thoughts?
Are you asking me about
Yeah,
that?
please. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna not necessarily answer you directly, but while I've been listening to everybody talk
Yes,
about the moment, I want to go back 50 years.
please.
Even more than that, I want to go back to when the experimental housing allowance programs were conceived. I think in this moment, it would be not a bad idea to take all the good pilot programs, all the MTW practices that touch on fair housing, touch on a whole bunch of stuff. And it would be quite wonderful if there was something that compiled really good outcomes, best practices, what came out of all of this work over the past 50 years. A lot of what we're hearing today isn't new, frankly. People have been thinking about this stuff for a long time, and there have been, as we said, different tests, different pilot programs that have in here and there in different parts of the country done certain things. But in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, nobody's really put together something that the average person on the street could pick up and read, you know, a few pages of something. Here's what we've been thinking about all along. Here's what we've tested out. Here's some really good things that have worked. Let's think about in the context of housing, as Keith said, it's on the map now. It's kind of extraordinary in a presidential campaign to have people talking about a housing crisis. Housing has always sort of been a poor stepchild to all the other sexier issues that we deal with in our country. And all of a sudden, it's very different. And I think it would be interesting to people who care to understand what has worked, could work, and what people are wanting to do now. Too many good things have happened and not enough people know about it, but it's got to be made accessible, and it can't be in the weeds. You know, a lot of people who will turn into this and watch this 2-hour discussion, if you're in the business, it's great. But what comes out of this is it's got to be sort of, in my mind, filtered down to other people who still can be very powerful in advocating for moving forward a little bit more quickly than taking 50 years to do a lot of this stuff. So that's
We could end right there, right? We should end this webinar right on that comment. Appreciate that, Marianne. It's really important as we look back and as we look forward to really what we stand in this moment. Appreciate that very much. I want to ask another question before we invite the future panel back up for final questions. Chris, you talked about discrimination sort of in your slides. Keith, you talked about it. Marissa and Arca, we've all been talking about fair housing issues. Many of you all may be familiar with Suffolk Law's Housing Discrimination Testing Study back in 2021. Qualified renters need not apply. What they found in that study was testers who identified as having a housing voucher were discriminated against. They were ghosted. They were not shown the listing. They were told about fewer apartments 86% of the time, right? 86% of the voucher holder testers experience discrimination. It shows clearly that this is still an issue. It's occurring at alarming rates. What should we be doing to address fair housing issues right now in this moment, especially as it pertains to voucher holders? Chris, please.
Well, certainly enforcing the law, but there's lots of ways in which landlords can say, they can say you need to have a certain FICO score, you need to have a first month, last month security deposit, and you need to sign a lease and move in tomorrow. And so again, I go back to I don't know that fundamentally the reason why people is renting up at 61% is because of discrimination. I don't want to downplay that. But I think what folks have been talking about is landlords are partners in this program, and we really need to lean into how do we make that partnership work. But I also think it's important to think about, well, where's the housing and who is the landlord? And in terms of where we are right now in this moment, and Keith was talking about, we are at a moment where housing affordability is front and center. And there's a lot of conversations bubbling up about social housing and new forms of housing. There's a lot of emphasis on supply. Rachel talked about the fact we need more housing. And in fact, that's in some sense a con against the voucher program. The arguments against the universal voucher program is in a world in which we don't have enough supply, you're just putting fuel into a fire and you're going to raise rents, right? And so I think one of the challenges we have as housers, as advocates here, is how we bring these different streams together into a coherent future for policy. One of the things we haven't talked about much is the fact that vouchers can be project-based. It's an enormously powerful tool to support the development of housing that otherwise wouldn't be able to. The conversation, Whitney, you and Keith were having about location and investing in communities. How do you take the voucher program and make it a way to invest in place? As we think about investing in social housing, and social housing has a million definitions. We could spend an hour and a half talking about what that is. A lot of times what it is, though, is housing that serves a broader range of folks, right? It's a broader range of income levels. And I think that has the threat of diverting resources away from serving the poorest folks to helping the middle class. But I think we all need to come together and say, okay, let's do that, develop that housing, but let's put the money in the voucher program so people have access to that housing. So you have socially motivated investors building houses in a wide range of communities, and that program will work best with vouchers. And it also will address the discrimination. You have landlords whose mission it is to serve those people. So I think that, as the United States starts to think about a new program, we're not starting from scratch. Think about the foundations and the pillars we have. And the voucher program is a really important one and could be really the fuel that makes that kind of program work.
Wow. I mean, I'm glad this is being recorded because lots of great ideas, lots of good energy. I look forward to that hour and a half coffee that we'll have to discuss this. I know we're winding down on time, so I apologize. Many of the questions that folks have been throwing in the chat, I hope that we can be able to share out to our panelists, and to want to just really thank everyone for being here, joining us for here today. Thank you again to our co-sponsors. Thank you again to Metro Housing Boston for putting this together. Carla, Teresa, Abby in the background, making sure this all came together. Certainly the planning committee, the entire team at Metro Housing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you all for being here. We'll be sharing out slides and resources after this. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation. And we look forward to all the hopeful opportunities to create new and innovative ideas as we look forward into the future of the program, and look forward to looking back 50 years from now where we'll be. So again, thank you all for joining us. And again, remember to just, keep this in mind as you do your work, that the change, although incremental, is change nonetheless. I think that's one thing that certainly came from this, and the work is mutually beneficial, so we can ensure folks have a home that they can live in which they can thrive. Thank you again, and look out for email and follow up following today's call. Thanks again.